So, RAINCODE came out just a few weeks ago, at least depending on when you're watching this. And since I really love the Danganronpa games, I've been excited for this game ever since it first got announced. And now that I've played a bit of the game, I finished chapter 0, I finished the prologue, and I'm like halfway through chapter 1, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about it, and give you a better idea on whether or not it's worth your time and money. The first section is going to be completely spoiler free for this reason. I'm just going to be giving you my thoughts and impressions, but in the second part I am gonna spoil the prologue, just so I'm able to give some more detailed and specific thoughts. There might be some very small visual spoilers though in the background, because of course I have to show something on screen, but I won't be talking about spoilers at all. So if you want to be extra safe, I guess you can put the video on in the background, but I did try to edit away all the spoilery text, so there shouldn't be any major spoilers in the spoiler-free section. When the time comes and I finish the game, there's also a pretty big chance that I'll make a full review on it, so if you like the video, why not leave a like, subscribe and hit the notification button so you'll know when that video is released. So as I already said, I am a massive Danganronpa fan, because of which I did kinda try my chances and decided to get the limited edition of this game. I just think it looks kinda nice, and it wasn't that expensive, so I thought, fuck it, why not? Comes with some cool stuff like the steelbook. Really like the steelbook actually. I just think it's kinda cool. It's not like the best steelbook ever or anything, but I like it. Also came with the soundtrack, which I really like. I really like the soundtrack. I don't use a CD player anymore though. It's on Spotify, but it's cool to have it physically. Same thing with the art book. Just small art book, you know how it is in the deluxe editions. Can't really show anything because of spoilers, also haven't looked into it myself all that much. But like, as you can see, just the protagonist, a little text about them, just a cool thing to have. And then, of course, it also comes with this little thing, plushie of the Shinigami character. Not too sure about how I feel about the design of like the purple blob thing, but it's a cool plushie, I'm not complaining. And lastly, most importantly even, comes with the game itself. Now, the game itself isn't in here, it's in my Switch, I've been playing it, but I really like this edition. I think it's cool, wasn't too expensive, very nice. But now, before I start talking about this game, I do kind of want to say that I will be referencing and comparing this game a lot to the Danganronpa games. Not specifically V3, that's just the only game that I have physically. But the game in a lot of ways is a spiritual successor to Danganronpa. And because of that, when I draw a comparison, or when I just want to give an example about a game mechanic, it is a lot easier to just compare it to its predecessor in a way, Danganronpa. Now, don't worry, if you haven't played Danganronpa before, you can still watch this video perfectly fine. You can also play RAINCODE perfectly fine. The game does not require any previous knowledge because it is a standalone thing, but in a lot of ways, from the way that the game plays, to the music, to the characters, to the writing and the dialogue, and just the general vibe that the game gives off, it's extremely Danganronpa. But let's get started. Let's finally talk about RAINCODE. Starting off, the basic premise is in my opinion pretty interesting, even if it is a little bit generic. You wake up in a train station, you lost your memories, and you need to catch the train to the Kanai ward. But you don't know why, or you don't even know what this Kanai ward is. This, of course, opens up a lot of possibilities for the main story plot twist-wise. The Danganronpa games are kind of known for having insane endings with massive plot twists. I feel like this game is gonna be similar to that. And just having the main character be one of the mysteries is very interesting, and I'm really interested to see where they're gonna take him. So far, the main character is pretty cool, though he's not like the best protagonist ever so far, but he's relatable. I like the way he reacts to the situations he's in. He's just an enjoyable protagonist. The side characters are pretty cool as well. They're all part of this detective group called the WDO, some of which possess a special power called a Forte. This power can range from simple things things like having really good hearing to some pretty complex things like time travel. And the inclusion of these powers are a pretty interesting element, since they don't only shake up the story but also the gameplay, and I can already see that they're gonna make for some very interesting cases. But if you play the Danganronpa games and you're just not too into the way that the characters are written, I don't think this game is gonna be for you, especially thanks to this character. She's in the game a lot, she talks a lot, and she's extremely over the top, extremely Danganronpa. A lot of people are gonna find her cringe. I find her kinda cringe, but in a sort of entertaining way. But outside of her, a lot of other characters also just feel very over the top, both in design and their dialogue. I'm not completely sold on all of their designs though. Some of them, while looking cool, just look a bit over-designed in my opinion. But in general, I do really like how the game looks. I really like the vibe that it has, the night streets, the neon signs everywhere, constantly raining, just an aesthetic that I'm personally a fan of. If you're talking pure graphic visual wise though, I'm honestly surprised at how good this game looks, because it is a Nintendo Switch exclusive, and as we know, while this is a really cool console, it's not the most powerful thing in the world, and because of that it does have some drawbacks, which I'll get into later in the video. But the environments in general look really nice, and they're also really fun to explore. Chapter 0 starts off with you just walking around, looking around, interacting with the environment, and there's a lot of dialogue, because of course it is a visual novel for the most part. Same thing for when the investigation starts, because the structure here is basically the same as Ace Attorney or Danganronpa for that matter. So far in the first 2 chapters, you basically start off with a daily life section. Here you can walk around town, explore the area, you can talk to some characters, you get some story exposition, and in chapter 1 they also introduce side quests. And I'm actually really surprised that I like the side quests. I did not think side quests would work in the game like this at all. I also don't really like it when side quests are forced into the game, but how it stands now, I'm actually surprisingly fine with this. It adds a lot to the city, to the world building, to the characters, and it just makes everything feel a lot more alive. And even though they do feel kinda mundane, they're short, they give some nice interactions and some pretty good rewards. The world is a pretty small but still decent size, so doing them doesn't really take that much time, and again, they teach you about the characters, the world, and it gives you an excuse to interact with this world more, making it easier to learn the layout, since you will be traversing this world a lot during the investigation, so it's always nice to just get familiar with the area. And this daily life section goes on until something happens and it's investigation time, which actually works really well in the complete 3D environments. It's a lot more immersive and you kinda get a better view of what's going on because of this as well. It also helps that this game has a lot more ways to present itself compared to most games of this genre. There are a lot of cutscenes, from in-game cutscenes to pre-rendered cutscenes to CGs with movement, and then of course the normal visual novel presentation. And it's just pretty nice and gives everything a lot more personality. Everything of note that you collect during a chapter also gets turned into a truth key, which is literally either a truth bullet from Danganronpa or a piece of evidence from the Ace Attorney series. So as always, you investigate the crime scene, talk to the characters, mostly Shinigami in this case because she's just following you around, but the other characters will also assist you since you're part of a group of detectives. They're also using their powers or their fortes during the investigations, which does add a lot to these segments. It just gives you a lot more possibilities, a lot more things to do, and it makes every investigation feel unique. Also, since this investigation is taking place in the open world, it feels a lot more open, bringing it closer to the Ace Attorney games. You can go to a number of locations that might be connected to either the victim or the suspect, and when you're there you can talk to a lot of different characters, which again adds to the world building. Because of this and the side quest that I mentioned earlier, the world just feels very real. It's a lot more than just a sandbox to investigate murders. Everything feels immersive, thought out, and well realized. And this goes on until the investigation time is over. The story will then progress and you will start the mystery labyrinth. This is basically your class trial, but instead of talking to your classmates, you're walking through this dungeon. This is just a dungeon visual wise though, because gameplay wise you're basically just walking through a very linear, very long hallway. But while you're in this hallway, the main character is discussing the case with Shinigami, and every time that he stumbles upon a mystery, that mystery materializes in front of you. This mystery can appear in a lot of forms, which are the mini-games or just the mystery-solving part. I'm not gonna talk about every single one of these mini-games though, but just to give you a better idea of what the gameplay entails, I will be mentioning a few of them. One of these is kind of a locked room. You have a question in front of you, you have multiple doors, each of these doors being a possible answer. You have time to talk to Shinigami, you have time to look over your truth keys, you choose the door whichever you think is correct, and you either succeed or you fail. Then you have a new Hangman's Gambit, because even though they completely reworked this in every single game, they keep bringing it back, and this time I actually really liked it. No, not because it has Shinigami fan service, but because it's the least frustrating version of this game so far. You have a lot less letters, they don't just scroll by, they don't keep respawning or despawning. You have a set number of letters that rotate, and once you select them, the one that you selected disappears. You're also not answering a question this time, but you're given a sentence with a missing word, so the context of the rest of the sentence can help you. If you ask me, they finally found a way to make Hangman's Gambit fun and just less annoying, since I always just used to be fighting the game over different interpretations of the question, or I would have an answer in mind that would technically be correct, but it wouldn't be the answer that the game is looking for, and I haven't run into that problem here yet. Another minigame that's returning, which is probably the most popular one from the Danganronpa franchise, is the new version of the non-stop debate, and right now, from the one chapter that I played, this is probably my least favorite one so far. Visually, it is kinda cool since it's kind of like a boss battle. You're dodging the statements, you're destroying the white noise, encountering specific highlighted statements with your truth plate. And while it is kind of fun, it's also kinda awkward since you need time to think about the statements. So the battle is very slow and the words are just hovering towards you slowly. But the biggest reason why I think it's a downgrade is that you're kinda missing the character dynamics. In Chapter 0, you just had one other character in this death battle, that being the boss, while compare this to Danganronpa, you had a class trial with like 10 students. Of course, the amount of students changed every chapter, but you had a lot more than one opponent. All of these classmates have their personalities, they all have their own motives, some of them would be lying, some of them would just kind of be messing around. It would bring some comedy into it, and it's just one massive chaotic discussion. While this one is just more like someone is telling you why this person is a suspect, and you have to find the contradiction to prove why that person is innocent. So I guess it's kind of a lot closer to the cross-examination of the Ace Attorney games, but even in Ace Attorney, you usually have Phoenix, you have the judge, you have Edgeworth, you have the defendant, and then you still have like your assistant in Maya or Pearl, and some other characters that might appear, while here it's literally just you, Shinigami, and the boss. Now, of course, there is still a pretty reasonable chance that in future chapters, multiple characters will be joining you in this death battle or just in the Labyrinth in general, but in Chapter 0 that was not a thing. Now I do kind of understand that Chapter 0 was a tutorial chapter, it was a pretty simple case, so I am keeping my hopes up for future chapters, but you never know. There are also some minigames that are completely new, of course. They didn't just take existing things and like build upon them or change them and then put them in RAINCODE. There are a few completely new minigames and some of them are pretty fun. One example being the God Shinigami part, which is pretty fun, even if it's basically just a quick time event. Another thing being that you can revisit crime scenes now. I know that happened sometimes in Danganronpa, but the way that they handled it in this case, it feels like this will happen more often. So going back to the crime scene is pretty cool, since you know a lot more, so you'll also be looking at the crime scene differently. There are also some other very interesting game mechanics added to this mystery labyrinth, but that kind of ties into the story, and if I were to tell you about it now, I would be sort of spoiling Chapter 0 for you, so I'm gonna come back to this later when I'm in the spoiler section. In general, I do think that this mystery labyrinth is very fun. Yeah, some sections do feel a bit awkward, but in general, it's a very fun and creative way to puzzle the mystery together. My biggest gripe so far would probably be the hallways between minigames. You're just running in a straight line while the characters talk and the next next minigame gets loaded. I feel like this would have just been better as a visual novel segment. Like, I get wanting it to be playable since the game already has a lot of visual novel segments, but it's a visual novel, and replacing that by just having the characters run in a straight line for a few minutes isn't really the most interesting replacement. But now, to end off the spoiler-free section of the video, there's one more thing that I do want to talk about, being the visuals. At first, I didn't really think that I would be talking about this, but as I've been playing the game, there are a few things that I noticed that I feel like I should kind of mention. One of which being the lip sync, because the lip sync here is synced to the Japanese audio. Most Japanese games do it, but even when playing in English, the timings are a close enough match, so you don't really notice it. But here, the lip sync for the English dub is absolutely atrocious. There's not really another way to say it. There are so many times that the voices have already finished their sentence, but then there's this awkward silence of a few seconds where the character just stands there and they're still animated as if they would be talking, because in the Japanese version, the audio is still going. I know that a few seconds might not sound like a lot, but trust me, when you're playing the game, it is very noticeable.
Master, are you ready to give your life for the truth?
Yeah, I am.
So, if you're someone who doesn't have a preference for either Japanese or English dubs, I would say just go for the Japanese one, but at the same time, if your preference is English, it's not that big of an issue to make you switch the language. The dub itself is really good, and it only happens in pre-rendered cutscenes, which is a relatively small amount. I'm personally sticking to the English voices as well, since it is a visual novel with a lot of dialogue, and a surprising amount of it is actually fully voiced, so I just like having the English voices. The lip sync isn't making the game unplayable, but it is kind of annoying at times, so I did want to mention it. And then the very last thing for the spoiler-free section are the Nintendo Switch drawbacks. Again, it's a Nintendo Switch exclusive, and it's not the most powerful console in the world, so if you're in a visual novel cutscene, meaning the sprite and the text box at the bottom, while the 3D models are animating in the background, the resolution for this background and the 3D models is turned down. They're just not sharp and they're kind of blurry, while the text and the text box is very sharp, crispy HD. It's just a bit weird. The frame rate as well just isn't the best, but it's understandable since the game looks really nice visually. It's also a very detailed world with all the neon signs and it's constantly raining, so with the game running on a Nintendo Switch, it's kind of to be expected, but it's nowhere near unplayable. I'm talking about 30 FPS most of the time with small dips here and there. I just wanted to mention it since I have seen a lot of people talk about them not wanting to play the game because of poor performance, but it's not all that bad. It's perfectly playable. But that was basically everything that I could talk about without spoiling anything. Maybe you're already convinced and you're ready to buy the game. Maybe it's the opposite and you're convinced that the game isn't for you. If you want to hear my small, spoiler-free verdict, the more I've been playing the game, the more I'm loving it. I'm recording this part a little bit later as well. I'm in chapter 2 right now, and I'm honestly just having a fantastic time with it. The world is super interesting, same with the characters and just the general direction of the story. I feel like a lot of love has been put in this game, and I'm just really enjoying it. But just in case you're not sure about the game yet, in the next segment I will be talking about spoilers for Chapter 0. I'm going to start with smaller spoilers, like that gameplay element that I mentioned earlier, but then later I will talk about actual plot details from the first 1.5 chapters, basically. But yeah, here's your spoiler warning, in case you don't want to know anything. If you're gonna play the game, have fun with it, thanks for watching, but for those who are sticking around a bit longer, let's talk about that game mechanic that I mentioned earlier, being the misdirections. Because in RAINCODE, the mystery labyrinths are based off of logic, and in the first case of Chapter 0, the killer sets up a misdirection, leaving a lot of clues so that we might reach the wrong conclusion. But since there is so much evidence, the mystery labyrinth actually sees this wrong outcome as a genuine possibility. So in Chapter 0, as you're progressing through the dungeon, in the end, the main character is like, something feels wrong, what about these pieces of evidence? They feel like they should have have a bigger importance, and then you can kind of just refuse the outcome that the dungeon presents you. So you can go back to different paths which then branch into new routes. Earlier you couldn't access this route because you had a lack of evidence, but now that you're further into the case, you have a lot more context about what's going on. You can prove that the thing that you thought was wrong earlier might actually be the right way of thinking. And as you just heard, in chapter 0, this is presented to you in a very linear manner. The character literally points out that, hey, maybe we're being set on the wrong track. But I think that this has a lot of potential to be used in future chapters. Kinda like the lie mechanic in Danganronpa V3. The first time that the game introduces this to you, it's done in a very similar way. The game basically tells you, hey, you should lie here. But for the rest of the game, it's never ever brought up again. But the mechanic is still there. And if you decide to lie at the right moment, it actually allows you to skip entire parts of the trial, giving you unique dialogue and everything along the way. So I feel like this misdirection mechanic will be done in a similar way. Like, you can just accept the outcome in maybe chapter 3 or something, but then you'll get a bad ending, making it so that you have to go back, think things over again, and maybe you'll come to another solution. I just think it's awesome, and it makes the case a lot more dynamic and a lot less linear. But that was basically the one game mechanic that I did want to talk about that kinda spoils how chapter 0 goes. Again, I don't think it was the biggest spoiler, but it had some story significance, so I just wanted to give it its own little segment. But now I will talk about spoilers for Chapter 0. Chapter 0 actually has a lot of things that can be spoiled. You might be thinking, oh, it's just a prologue, how bad can it be? Well, it's pretty bad. Not in the way that it's bad, it's good, but you can get spoiled pretty hard here. So I wanted to give one final warning. If you don't want to know anything, if you want to go into this game blind, stop watching the video here. You can always come back at a later date. You can check out my full review at another time. I don't care, but I will be talking about spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Everyone fucking dies. The first case had like 5 characters in total, or 7 if you include the main character and Shinigami, but all of those 5 other characters outside of them are just killed off immediately in Chapter 0. Of course, I'm not surprised the characters died. I was expecting like 1 or 2 to die in Chapter 0, but 5 characters before Chapter 1 even starts is definitely a new record. So this does have me a little bit conflicted. On the one side, I think it's kind of wasted potential, or at least a chance of wasted potential, especially if the characters from Chapter 1 and onwards don't leave a strong impression. It's kinda like, well, then why did we kill the Chapter 0 characters? But if the game ends up being great regardless, then this isn't a problem at all. Because playing through that case was great, it was a lot of fun, it set a tone for the whole experience to come, and it definitely takes some balls to do something like this. The thing is though, Chapter 1 only introduces like 4 or 5 characters, which is a lot less than I expected. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but what I always liked about the Danganronpa games was the cast, and having a larger group of characters and killing a few of them in each and every chapter also made it so every chapter felt like we were progressing the main story, which is something that Ace Attorney, for example, kind of missed. Because in that game, not every chapter was about the main story, so it just had some filler chapters, and while some of those filler chapters were very enjoyable, it also had some chapters that just weren't as good, and it made the games kind of hit or miss for me. Now, of course, I'm not far enough into the game to say whether or not this is a good or a bad thing. Who knows, maybe these characters are gonna get a lot of time, a lot of development, meaning that I'll get very attached to them, only for them to take them away from me in the end. Because so far, all the chapters that I've played have honestly just been really good, and they've also just been focusing on developing or fleshing out these characters, which is something that I just really enjoy. And maybe they'll even introduce more characters, or some of the enemy characters that got introduced might turn into good guys, or the other way around. There is a lot of potential here, there is a lot of stuff that still could happen, but right now these are some worries that I had, or just some thoughts that I had while playing through the chapter. Again, while I do have some things that I'm not too sure about yet, I've really been loving this game. I can see this going into a very interesting direction, and I honestly could not recommend it enough. especially if you're a fan of these type of games. But with that, I'm pretty sure that I talked about everything that I want to talk about with RAINCODE. But now, let me know your thoughts. Did this video convince you to play the game? Did this video convince you to not play the game? Maybe you even played the game already and you're just here to hear my thoughts, in which case, thank you. In all of those cases, thank you. But let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments below, I really appreciate it. And while you're down there, why not leave a like or check out my channel and subscribe? So you can be notified for when I make other videos about a lot of different games, but also for when my full RAINCODE review drops. Plus, if you're a new viewer, you may not know this, but returning people to the channel probably noticed that this is completely new for me. With that, I'm talking about just showing myself. I just kinda wanted to experiment with having a camera for certain segments for videos like this one. I honestly have no idea if I'm ever gonna be doing this again. This might be a one-time thing, this might become a regular thing. I'm also still experimenting with it, like this is my first time on camera. Some stuff might be a bit weird, might have to get used to it, but we'll see how it turns out. If you have anything to say about it, just let me know, I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts. But again, that was it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I hope to see you guys again soon.